My name is Blake Haley, and at 31 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in the magnificent dining room of a defense industry billionaire, being called trash. As my boyfriend, Reese, squeezed my hand under the mahogany table, his father, Alistair Covington, stared at me with eyes as cold as ice. More than 24 powerful guests sat in stunned silence as he sneered, his condescending voice echoing through the room. "A little soldier girl in a borrowed dress," he said, looking straight at Reese. "I've told you, son. You can try to clean up trash, but it will never stop smelling like the gutter it came from." The blood in my veins turned to ice. A hot, stinging humiliation spread across my face. Before I tell you what I did next, and how that one sentence became the final piece of evidence that would trigger the downfall of a billion-dollar empire, let me know what city you're listening to this story from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss how a soldier responds when her honor is attacked. But to understand how I ended up in that dining room, how I found myself at the center of that storm, you have to go back 7 months. Back to a moment that felt so simple, so completely disconnected from the world of secrets and lies I lived in. It started, of all places, in a humble diner off a highway in Arlington, with a plate of chili cheese fries. I remember that night so clearly. I'd just finished a hellish week in a windowless room at Fort Belvoir, staring at classified data until my eyes burned. All I wanted was that plate of fries and to be left alone. My sanctuary for the mission was the Blue Spoon, a classic diner that always smelled of old coffee and quiet desperation. It was perfect. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the corner, the kind that had seen 1,000 lonely meals before mine, and felt the rigid posture of my uniform finally start to soften. Then the bell above the door chimed, and he walked in. He was wearing a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. In the humble, fluorescent glow of the Blue Spoon, he was as out of place as a parrot in a chicken coop. Every head turned. He scanned the crowded room, his eyes landing on the empty seat across from me. He hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Excuse me," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The place is packed. Would you mind if I sat here?" Normally, my answer would have been a flat no. My personal space is a fortress. But something in his eyes, a flicker of the same exhaustion I felt in my own bones, made me just nod. He slid into the booth, placing a worn leather-bound book on the table. For a few minutes, we sat in a comfortable silence. The waitress brought my chili cheese fries, a glorious, messy pile of melted cheddar, spicy chili, and crisp potatoes. His eyes lit up. "I haven't had those in years," he said with a genuine smile. And just like that, we started talking. For 2 solid hours. His name was Reese. We didn't talk about work or money or the soul-crushing politics of DC. We talked about how the Pittsburgh Steelers were having a rebuilding year, but you could never count them out. We talked about the specific smell of summer rain hitting hot asphalt. We talked about that strange, hollow feeling of being lonely in a city of millions. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He understood the things I never said out loud. For the first time in years, I wasn't Captain Haley, military intelligence officer. I was just Blake. And I hadn't realized how much I'd missed her. It wasn't a one-time thing. Reese didn't try to impress me with Michelin star restaurants or rooftop bars overlooking the Potomac. He was different. He took me to a Nationals baseball game where we ate hot dogs with too much mustard and screamed ourselves hoarse when the Nats hit a home run. He drove us out to Shenandoah National Park on a crisp autumn Saturday. We hiked for miles under a canopy of fiery red and gold leaves, not saying much, just breathing in the clean air and listening to the crunch of leaves under our boots. It was there, sitting on a rock overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, that he told me about the pressure he felt to be someone he wasn't, someone his family expected him to be. His real dream, he confessed, was to open a small, independent art gallery, a place for unknown artists. I found myself opening up in ways I never had before. I told him about my father, a steelworker from outside Pittsburgh. I described the calluses on his hands, a roadmap of a life of hard labor, and the fierce, unshakable pride in his eyes the day I graduated from West Point. I told Reese how my father taught me that a person's worth wasn't in their bank account, but in the strength of their handshake and the integrity of their word. I was falling for him. Hard. For a few blissful months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally thrown me a bone. That this genuine, kind-hearted man was my reward for all the lonely years of service. But the real world doesn't wait for fairy tales to finish. It kicks the door in. I was back in the SCIF at Fort Belvoir, the acronym for a place that's as sterile and soulless as its name, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. My mission was to investigate a major defense contractor suspected of systemic fraud, specifically falsifying test results on composite materials for body armor and armored vehicles. Lives were on the line. My job was to find the truth buried under mountains of forged shipping manifests and doctored lab reports. I typed a keyword into the database. A name popped onto the screen. Covington Dynamics. My heart skipped a beat. A cold dread washed over me. It's a common name, I told myself, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Just a coincidence. But there are no coincidences in my line of work. I clicked on the Corporate Leadership tab. The organizational chart loaded, a web of names and faces. And there, under the stern portrait of CEO Alistair Covington, was a smaller photo. A face I knew as well as my own. The face I saw in my dreams. Reese Covington, only son of CEO Alistair Covington. The screen didn't just blur, it felt like it shattered before my eyes. The air was vacuumed from my lungs, replaced by the icy chill of betrayal. Not betrayal by him, but by fate itself. The man I loved, the man whose gentleness had disarmed my soul, was the son of the enemy. The very man whose greed was putting my soldiers, my brothers and sisters in arms, in danger. I don't remember the drive to Major Miller's office. I think I operated on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I walked into his office and stood at attention, a perfect soldier on the outside, a complete wreck on the inside. I laid out the facts robotically, my voice devoid of all emotion. Each word was a shard of glass in my throat. Sir, I have to report a personal conflict with Operation Ironclad. I'm involved in a relationship with the son of the primary target. Major Miller, a man who had survived 2 wars and 1,000 political battles in the Pentagon, just looked at me. He didn't look at me like a superior officer. He looked at me with the weary eyes of someone who understood. He was silent for a long, agonizing minute, letting the full weight of my confession settle in the room. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low and gravelly. Captain, he said, this is a goddamn situation, a hell of one. He paused, his gaze unwavering. But it's also a golden opportunity. I felt my blood run cold. I knew what was coming next. Your orders, continue the relationship. Treat every date as a reconnaissance mission. My love had officially become a military operation. That night, after leaving Major Miller's office, I didn't go straight home. I just drove. The Major's words echoed in my head, a cold, hard command that twisted my love for Reese into a weapon. Treat every date as a reconnaissance mission. The order forced a question I didn't want to answer. Who was I in this equation? Was I Blake, the woman who had finally let her guard down? Or was I Captain Haley, the soldier who followed orders no matter the cost? To find the answer, I had to go back. Back to a place of steel and smoke, where my moral compass was forged. I grew up in Monessen, Pennsylvania, a small town in the Rust Belt, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the steel mill's whistle. My world was shaped by the metallic tang in the air and the faint, ever-present scent of coal. My father was a man of few words, his hands a testament to 30 years of hard labor. He didn't preach about morality, he lived it. He taught me that a person's real value wasn't what they owned, but what their word was worth. Blake, he used to say, his voice rough like sandpaper as he cleaned grease from under his fingernails. You can lose it all. Money, house, everything. But don't you ever let anyone take your honor. Once your word ain't worth a damn, you ain't worth a damn either. He lived by that code every single day for 30 years at that mill. He wasn't a supervisor or a foreman. He was just one of the guys on the floor. A man who showed up on time, did his job right, and never cut corners. His handshake was his bond, and in our town, that meant more than any contract written by a lawyer. Then, in the mid-90s, the wolves came to town. I remember it like it was yesterday. The mill was bought out by some big corporation from New York City. Men in slick, expensive suits and shiny shoes showed up, walking the floor like they owned the place, which I guess they did. They held a town hall meeting in the high school gymnasium, promising a brighter future, better efficiency, and a new era of prosperity for Monessen. They smiled a lot and talked about synergy and optimization, words that meant nothing to the men whose sweat had built that mill. A week later, the letters went out. They called it corporate restructuring. My father called it what it was, a betrayal. They laid off half the workforce. My dad was one of them. He was only 3 years away from his pension. 3 years. 30 years of loyalty, of breathing in soot and enduring blistering heat, erased by a signature on a piece of paper from an office 1,000 miles away. They threw him away like a piece of worn-out machinery. I was 16, and for the first time, I saw the look of utter defeat in my father's eyes. A quiet, hollowed-out despair. And in me, a fire of pure, unadulterated rage began to burn. A rage that has never fully gone out. The worst part was his silence. My father never complained. He never cursed the company or the men in suits. He just absorbed it. The next week, he took a job as a night watchman at a warehouse for half the pay and none of the benefits. He still woke up every morning, looked people straight in the eye, and went to work. But I saw the toll it took. I saw him age a decade in a year. I saw how the injustice of it all was eating him up from the inside, eroding the quiet strength that had always defined him. He was a man of honor in a world that had none. It was then that I made a decision. I would never be a victim. I wouldn't be a pawn in some rich man's game. I would join the one institution I believed still valued honor above all else, the United States Army. A place where your background didn't matter as much as your commitment, where merit was earned, not inherited. I swore to myself that I would fight for the people like my father, the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. That night, after getting the order from Major Miller, I finally returned to my small, empty apartment. I walked to the full-length mirror on my closet door and just stood there, staring at the woman in the reflection. She was wearing the uniform I'd been so proud to earn. It was supposed to be a shield, a symbol of integrity. But as I looked into my own eyes, I saw my father's face. I saw his quiet dignity, his silent suffering. And then I saw Alistair Covington. He was the same man in a more expensive suit, richer, more powerful, more insulated from the consequences of his actions, but the same creature at his core. A man who saw people like my father, people like me, not as human beings, but as costs to be cut on a balance sheet. A man whose greed was the modern version of the corporate raid that had broken my hometown and my father's spirit. My duty as a soldier was clear. My orders were clear. But this was no longer just about duty. It was personal. This was for the 16-year-old girl who watched her hero get crushed. This was for the man who taught me the meaning of honor. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The reflection in the mirror seemed to harden, the softness of the woman who had fallen for Reese receding, replaced by the steel of the soldier. "I won't let them win, Dad," I whispered to the empty room, my voice a low, fierce promise. This time, I won't let them win. My life split into two. It was a clean, brutal fracture right down the middle of my soul. By day, I was Captain Haley. I'd sit in the sterile, windowless SCF, the air humming with the quiet thrum of servers and secrets. My world was a screen filled with the cold, hard facts of Alistair Covington's betrayal. I analyzed falsified shipping manifests from Covington Dynamics, cross-referencing them with satellite imagery of their factories. The numbers were soulless, but they told a story of pure, unadulterated greed. Each line of data I uncovered, each encrypted conversation I helped decipher, was another nail in the coffin I was building for the man. The work was precise, logical, and fueled by the cold fire I'd felt since the night I made my vow. But then, the workday would end. I'd walk out of that secure facility, leaving the soldier behind, and try to become Blake again. By night, I was his girlfriend. I'd be sitting across from Reese in a cozy little Italian place in Georgetown, the smell of garlic and wine in the air. He'd be talking passionately about a new sculptor he'd discovered, his eyes alive with a light that had nothing to do with profit margins or corporate espionage. I would smile, nod, and ask the right questions, playing the part of the attentive girlfriend. But inside, my mind was a battlefield. While he described the artist's use of bronze, I was replaying encrypted audio files. While he talked about beauty and truth, I was staring at the man who was the son of a liar and a cheat. His hand would reach across the table and cover mine. His touch was warm, real, and sincere. And every time he did it, I felt like the worst kind of criminal. I was a parasite, feeding off his trust, turning his affection into intelligence. The guilt was a physical weight, a constant pressure behind my ribs that made it hard to breathe. The lie was exhausting. Some days, the line between my two worlds blurred so much I felt like I was losing my mind. The strain of it was a constant low-grade fever. But I told myself it was for a greater good. I was protecting people. It was just numbers on a page. Until it wasn't. The call came at 2 a.m. It was Major Miller, and his voice was tight, stripped of its usual gruffness. "Captain, we have a situation." My blood ran cold. "What is it, sir?" "It's Sergeant Evans. Young kid, just had a daughter. He was on a training exercise at Fort Irwin, simulated IED blast. The composite armor on their striker, it shattered like glass." I couldn't speak. I knew Evans, a good soldier. A face I saw every week. Miller continued, his voice like stone. "He's lost his left leg below the knee. 2 others are in critical condition. The preliminary report points to substandard materials." He paused, letting the final blow land. The manufacturer of that specific armor panel was a subsidiary of Covington Dynamics. I hung up the phone, a wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. I stumbled to the bathroom, bracing myself against the sink, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. This wasn't about numbers on a page anymore. This wasn't an abstract game of cat and mouse. This was real. This was Sergeant Evans, lying in a hospital bed at Walter Reed, his life and his family's life changed forever. This was my soldier's blood. The guilt I felt for deceiving Reese was still there, but now it was eclipsed by a white-hot rage, a cold, clear fury that burned away all doubt. Alistair Covington wasn't just a corporate fraud, he was a monster who traded soldiers' limbs for profit. An hour later, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Reese. He must have been driving by and saw my lights on. When I opened the door, his smile faded. "Blake, are you okay?" he asked, stepping inside. I hadn't even realized I'd been sitting in the dark, just staring at the wall. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug. And for one terrible, weak moment, I almost broke. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him everything, that his father was a monster, that his family's fortune was built on the broken bodies of men like Sergeant Evans, that our entire relationship was a lie. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just leaned against him, letting his warmth seep into my bones, a warmth I knew I was stealing. And I felt like the biggest coward in the world. He was trying to comfort me from a storm he had no idea he was at the center of. In the days that followed, he must have sensed the growing distance between us, the invisible wall I was building, brick by brick. He became more attentive, more determined to break through whatever was troubling me. One evening, he took my hands in his expression earnest and full of hope. "Blake," he said, his voice soft. "My grandparents are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary next week. There's going to be a big party at their estate. I want you to come with me." He squeezed my hands. "I want to introduce you to my entire family." My heart stopped. The air left the room. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I was being ordered into the lion's den, and I knew I couldn't refuse. "I need your support right now." If you believe I'm doing the right thing, please hit that like button. And just type honor in the comments below so I know you're with me on this. I looked at Reese, at his hopeful, trusting face, and the lie I had to tell tasted like ash in my mouth. I'd love to, I said, forcing a smile. My mission had just entered its most dangerous phase. I was going into the heart of the beast. The Covington estate in McLean, Virginia wasn't a house, it was a fortress of wealth. As Reese drove us through the imposing iron gates and up a winding driveway, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a party. This was an infiltration. The place looked more like a private museum than a home. Soaring ceilings, abstract paintings on the walls that were probably worth a fortune, and floors so polished you could see your own terrified reflection in them. Everything was perfect, chilly, and smelled distinctly of old money and fresh-cut flowers. The air itself felt expensive. Reese squeezed my hand. "Just be yourself," he whispered, but even he looked tense, like a man walking into his own trial. A woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a diamond necklace that could probably fund a small army drifted towards us. Genevieve Covington, Reese's mother. She greeted me with a smile that was perfectly practiced and didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile that assesses you, catalogs your weaknesses, and dismisses you, all in under 3 seconds. "Blake, so lovely to finally meet you," she said, her voice smooth as silk. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the simple navy dress I'd borrowed from a friend. Oh, what a charming dress. So simple. It wasn't a compliment, it was a verdict. In her world, simple was a terminal diagnosis. I felt like a bug under a microscope. Every instinct I had honed as an intelligence officer was screaming at me. Red flags were going up everywhere. I was in hostile territory. And the enemy didn't carry guns. They carried champagne flutes and wielded words like scalpels. I was trying to navigate a conversation about summering in the Hamptons with one of Genevieve's friends when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a young woman with streaks of pink in her dark hair and mischievous, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a vintage band t-shirt under a black blazer, a small act of rebellion in a sea of couture. "You must be Blake," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. "I'm Sloan. Thank God you're here. I was about to die of boredom listening to my uncle talk about the stock market." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Let's get out of here." Before I could answer, she grabbed my arm and pulled me through a set of French doors out onto a sprawling stone balcony overlooking immaculate gardens, away from the prying eyes and the suffocating small talk. Sloane's straightforward, no-nonsense energy was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time all evening, I felt my shoulders relax. I could actually breathe. "Sorry about them," she said, nodding back towards the party. "They can be a lot." "It's impressive," I said carefully. She snorted. "It's a performance. My mother lives to maintain appearances, and my father, well, you'll meet him. He's the director of this whole circus." She looked at me, her gaze surprisingly direct. "Reese really likes you. He hasn't been this happy in years." "I really like him too," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all night. We stood there for a moment, watching the guests mingle below. Sloane spoke about her family with a kind of blunt, cynical honesty that was both shocking and refreshing. "My dad thinks everything and everyone has a price tag," she said, her voice tinged with a bitterness that seemed too old for her years. "He doesn't believe in things like honor or loyalty, not really. He believes in leverage. And my mom, she believes in the Covington name. That's her religion." I listened, absorbing every word. This wasn't just gossip, it was crucial intelligence. Then Sloane's tone shifted, becoming softer, almost shy. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I feel like I can trust you," she said, lowering her voice. "I use some of my trust fund money. I secretly sponsor a nonprofit. It's a center that provides mental health support for military families. You know, helping them deal with PTSD and the stress of deployment." I stared at her, stunned. Here, in the heart of the family whose greed was actively harming soldiers, was someone trying to heal them. She gave me a wry smile and a quick wink. Don't tell my dad. He'd say it's a bad investment, not enough ROI. In that moment, looking at this young woman with pink hair and a courageous heart, I didn't just see Reese's sister. I saw an ally. A flicker of light in a very dark place. Just then, Reese appeared at the French doors, a warm smile on his face when he saw us. I see you've met my sister, he said, walking towards me. Sloane's a little different. She's great, I said, smiling back. At that exact moment, a tall, imposing figure appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the room behind him. The cheerful chatter from the party seemed to dim. It was Alistair Covington. The smile vanished from Reese's face. Dad, he said, his voice instantly tight with tension. Alistair didn't even glance at his son. His cold, calculating eyes were locked directly on me. There was no warmth, no welcome, not a flicker of emotion. It was the look of a predator sizing up an unfamiliar creature that had wandered into his territory. The storm had arrived. Dinner was served at a long, imposing table that seemed to stretch for a mile. It was set with a dizzying array of silverware and crystal glasses that sparkled like diamonds under the recessed lighting of a massive chandelier. I sat on Reese's right, feeling the subtle but constant pressure of his knee against mine. A silent, desperate message of support. Across the polished expanse of mahogany, Alistair Covington held court. He wasn't just sitting at the head of the table, he was enthroned, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable power. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a soldier sensing an ambush, that I was his designated target for the evening. The psychological interrogation began with unnerving subtlety, a masterful chess game played with words instead of pieces. He didn't address me directly at first, a classic power move to establish that I was, for the moment, beneath his notice. He raised his glass of red wine, a deep, blood-red vintage that I knew without asking cost more than my monthly rent, and spoke to the table at large, his voice a smooth, commanding baritone that effortlessly silenced all other conversation. The defense industry is a complex and often misunderstood business, he began, his gaze sweeping over his guests. We at Covington Dynamics create the tools, the hardware of freedom. But it is the brave young men and women of our military, the ones on the front lines, who must wield them. He paused, letting the weight of his patriotic sentiment settle. Then his eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, until they landed on me. Isn't that right, Captain Haley? The honorific was a weapon. It sounded like a respectful acknowledgement, but my training screamed that it was an opening salvo, a test. He was framing me, defining me in front of his world. I felt a memory surface from my SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. The instructor's voices barking in my head. When under psychological pressure, control your biometrics. Keep your heart rate down. Answer the question, but only the question. Give them nothing. I met his stare and held it. Yes, sir, I replied, my voice perfectly level, a calm I did not feel. And they place their trust in the fact that those tools won't fail them when it matters most. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps at my directness, crossed his face before it was replaced by a condescending smirk. Ah, yes, trust. A noble sentiment. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. Growing up in the Rust Belt must have given you a very practical perspective on life. Your father was in steel, wasn't he? My blood ran cold. The casual way he dropped that detail confirmed it. He'd had me investigated. Of course he had. A man like Alistair Covington left nothing to chance. A good, honest, blue-collar trade, he continued, a patronizing warmth in his voice that was more insulting than any slur. A world away from the illusions and complexities we chase here in Washington. He was drawing a line in the sand as clear as a border wall. I was from the world of grit and labor, a place of simple, honest folk. He was the master of this complex universe, the puppeteer. Reese, sensing the escalating tension, tried to run interference. Dad, Blake was just telling me about her last hiking trip to Old Rag Mountain. Alistair waved a dismissive hand, cutting his own son off without a single glance. His eyes remained locked on me. So, tell us, Captain, what exactly does an intelligence officer do? I must confess, I've always pictured a rather dull affair. Endless paperwork in some gray, windowless government office. He was trivializing my career, my service, reducing years of intense training and sacrifice to a boring clerical job. Every word was a carefully calibrated insult, designed to provoke an emotional response, to make me defensive. Don't react. Observe. Let him reveal his own weaknesses. I offered a small, polite smile. Some days are like that, sir, but the work has its purpose. He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound that grated on my nerves. And I imagine the pay isn't much to speak of. The government can be quite frugal in its appreciation. He paused, letting the next line hang in the air like a poisonous vapor. I do hope Reese is taking good care of you. There it was, the direct hit. Packaged as concern, delivered as an accusation. He was calling me a gold digger, suggesting I was with his son for a lifestyle I couldn't afford. The cold, clear rage I'd felt for Sergeant Evans, the old, bitter anger for my father, surged within me. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his blood money, but I took a slow, silent breath and channeled it, converting the hot, useless anger into icy, disciplined calm. I met his gaze without flinching, my smile never wavering. The government takes care of us just fine, sir, I said, my voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel I knew he couldn't have missed. Besides, loyalty isn't always measured in dollars. That seemed to get under his skin. His mask of sophisticated charm slipped for a second. He gestured with his wineglass to a portly man at the far end of the table. Speaking of which, we just brought 4-star General Masters onto our board of directors, he announced with a predatory grin. A fine man. It's truly amazing what a generous compensation package and stock options can do for one's perspective after a long career in public service. The message was a missile aimed directly at me. Everyone has a price, even your decorated generals, and you, little girl, are certainly no general. My polite smile remained, but my answer was sharp and immediate. Some of us still believe that our service is to the country, sir, not to the highest bidder. His jaw tightened. The sophisticated game was over. He was done playing chess and was ready to flip the board. The civility vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly contempt he'd been hiding all along. He set his wineglass down on the table, with a thud that was just a little too loud, silencing the remaining murmurs of conversation around the table. Loyalty, he scoffed, the word dripping with a disdain he no longer tried to hide. Such a charming, quaint notion. His eyes darted to Reese, a look of profound disappointment, then snapped back to me, full of venom. But in the end, everything has its price. Everyone has their place. And that's when he delivered the killing blow. The line he'd been working towards all night. The one that would change everything. He looked me up and down, a sneer twisting his lips as he prepared for the public execution. A little soldier girl in a borrowed dress. Alistair Covington finished his pronouncement. A little soldier girl in a borrowed dress. He paused for effect, letting the insult hang in the air like a foul stench. Then he looked straight at Reese, twisting the knife with a final, vile blow. I've told you, son, you can try to clean up trash, but it will never stop smelling like the gutter it came from. Silence. It was not a polite dinner party silence. It was a dead, absolute vacuum, a black hole that sucked all the air and sound out of the room. I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the wall of my chest. From the corner of my eye, I saw Reese jolt to his feet, his heavy chair scraping violently against the marble floor with a sound like a scream. His face was a deathly pale mask of fury and profound shame. "Dad, that's enough," he choked out, his voice cracking with emotion. But before he could say more, I placed my hand gently on his forearm. It was a light touch, but it was laden with the authority of a field command. The message was clear. Sit down. Stand down. This is my fight. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. but the cold, unwavering calm in my own eyes must have been enough. He slowly, reluctantly, sank back into his chair. In that singular instant, every ounce of personal hurt, every sting of public humiliation, every complicated feeling I had for the man sitting beside me, it all receded. It was wiped clean, pushed aside by a force far more powerful. The emotional, vulnerable part of my brain shut down. The soldier took command. A lethal, crystalline clarity washed over me, a state of hyper-awareness I hadn't felt since my last tour. This was no longer a family dinner party from hell. This was a tactical engagement. This was a battlefield. And Alistair Covington, in his infinite, blinding arrogance, had just handed me the perfect weapon. His pride was about to become his undoing. Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. I didn't rush. I let the moment stretch, drawing every eye in the room to me. My back was ramrod straight, my shoulders squared, the same posture I held when addressing a commanding officer. My entire demeanor shifted. I was no longer Reese's quiet, uncomfortable girlfriend trying to fit in. I was Captain Blake Haley of the United States Army, and I was on duty. As I stood, my hand brushed against my tall, slender water glass. It tipped, falling to the floor and shattering on the marble with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. A woman gasped. Every single eye was now locked on me, their expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity. Perfect. I looked directly at Alistair Covington, ignoring everyone else. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, sharp, and carried to every corner of that opulent room with the penetrating force of a drill sergeant's command. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Covington," I began, my tone devoid of heat, pure ice. "I don't belong here." I let my gaze sweep slowly across the table, over the glittering jewelry, the expensive suits, and the deeply uncomfortable faces. My world is a place of honor, loyalty, and integrity. Concepts that seem to have rusted over and been forgotten in this room. I let that statement hang in the air for a beat, letting the accusation land before I turned my full attention, my full firepower, back to him. "You call me trash," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense, more personal. "But I wonder, Sergeant Evans, who is currently at Walter Reed Medical Center learning to walk on a prosthetic leg, because the armor on his striker, your armor, Mr. Covington, shattered like cheap pottery. What would he call you?" A collective gasp went through the room. Alistair's face, which had been a mask of smug contempt, froze. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. I pressed the attack, my words like bullets from a rifle. "What about the soldiers on patrol in Afghanistan right now, at this very moment, wearing the body armor with the falsified test results that your company knowingly approved? The men and women who trust your family's name to protect them. What do you think they would call you?" The stunned silence had now morphed into pure, unadulterated shock. Alistair was speechless, utterly paralyzed, his mouth slightly agape. Reese looked like he had been physically struck, his face ashen. I delivered the next volley, my voice ringing with the full authority of my commission. "My name is Captain Blake Haley. I am an investigator with the United States Army's Military Intelligence Division." I saw Genevieve Covington's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "For the past 7 months, my unit has been conducting Operation Ironclad, a top-secret investigation into systemic contract fraud committed by Covington Dynamics." I took a deliberate step away from the table, creating space, owning the room. I was no longer his guest. I was his judge. "Your insult tonight, Mr. Covington, wasn't just a personal slight. It was a final, crucial confirmation for your psychological criminal profile. An arrogance so profound, a sense of entitlement so absolute that you genuinely believe you are above the law and beyond consequence." I gave him a cold, empty smile. "So for that, I thank you. You've just provided the final, irrefutable piece of evidence we needed." I subtly glanced down at the small, ornamental pin on my dress, a piece of sophisticated tech issued by my unit, disguised as simple, elegant jewelry. "And just so you know," I said, my voice now almost a whisper, but a whisper that carried the weight of an avalanche, This entire conversation, including that last little confession of your worldview, has been recorded. If you are on my side right now, I need you to hit that like button. Let's blow it up. And in the comments, I want you to type the 3 words I know Alistair Covington deserves to hear. Guilty as charged. Let me see it. I let my eyes meet his one last time. A copy of this recording will be on the Attorney General's desk at 700 hours tomorrow morning. The room erupted. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. I heard Genevieve let out a small, strangled shriek. Men in expensive suits started shouting, some at me, some at Alistair, scrambling to distance themselves from a man who was suddenly radioactive. And Alistair. He finally found his voice. It wasn't a sophisticated retort. It wasn't a clever denial. It was the guttural roar of a wounded, cornered animal. A roar of pure, impotent rage. But it was too late. The bomb had already been detonated. The moment after my final sentence landed, the opulent dining room detonated into chaos. Alistair's roar was primal, a sound of pure fury from a king who had just been dethroned in his own court. As he lunged forward, 2 men in dark suits, his private security detail, no doubt, moved to intercept me. They were fast, but my people were faster. Major Miller had anticipated everything. Before Alistair's men could take 2 steps, the French doors burst open and a team of 4 uniformed military police officers entered the room. They were calm, professional, and moved with an efficiency that made Covington's private security look like amateurs. Captain Haley, the lead MP said, his voice cutting through the noise, "We're your escort." They formed a protective diamond around me, parting the sea of shocked and shouting guests. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I knew I would see Reese's face, and I didn't have the strength to see the devastation I had just wrought upon his entire world. I kept my eyes forward, my back straight, and let the MPs guide me out into the cool night air, leaving a billion-dollar empire burning in my wake. That night, I wasn't taken back to my apartment. Standard procedure. I was now a high-value asset in a national security investigation. They drove me in a black, unmarked sedan to a safe house on the Marine Corps base in Quantico. It was a sparse, anonymous room with cinder block walls and a single bed. It felt more like home than any fancy hotel ever could. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, making sleep impossible. I just sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the entire night until the sun began to streak the sky with gray. At precisely 700 hours the next morning, just as I had promised, a digital copy of the recording from my PIN was securely delivered to the Attorney General of the United States. And then, the full, awesome power of the federal justice system began to move. It moved with breathtaking speed. By 0900, search and seizure warrants, signed by a federal judge, were unsealed. By 0930, teams of FBI agents in their trademark blue jackets were swarming the Covington Dynamics headquarters in McLean. Employees were told to step away from their computers as agents began boxing up servers and files. It was the lead story on every news channel's live feed. By 1100, another FBI team raided the Covington family estate, the very place I had left just hours before. They were seen carrying out computers, documents, and what news anchors breathlessly described as numerous pieces of potential evidence. And at 11:45, live on CNN, it happened. Alistair Covington, looking haggard and defeated in a wrinkled suit, was led out of his corporate office in handcuffs. He was flanked by federal agents and perp walked past a screaming mob of reporters. The image of his downfall was instantly iconic, blasted across every screen in the country. Several of his top executives were arrested in similar raids throughout the day. The story wasn't just news, it was a firestorm. I was completely isolated, cut off from the world. My personal cell phone had been confiscated, and my only point of contact was Major Miller. He would visit the safe house once a day to give me updates, occasionally showing me clips from the news on a secure tablet. The fallout was biblical. Politicians who had taken millions in campaign donations from Alistair were now scrambling to get in front of cameras, condemning him in the strongest possible terms. The story about Sergeant Evans's injury had leaked, and his young wife gave a heartbreaking interview that went viral. Soon, other military families began to come forward with their own stories of faulty Covington equipment. An old buried story about an industrial accident at one of their Pennsylvania plants, a story they had paid millions to keep quiet, was unearthed by an investigative journalist. The dam had broken. Covington Dynamics, once a shining symbol of American industrial might, had become the national symbol for corporate greed and betrayal overnight. I hadn't just exposed a man. I had ignited a national reckoning. My quiet, secret investigation had become a public crusade. Seeing the system I served work with such righteous fury, seeing justice move so decisively, filled me with a profound sense of pride and reinforced my belief in the mission. But as the days bled into one another in that sterile, quiet room, the professional satisfaction began to fade, replaced by a single, aching question. Where was Reese? What was he thinking? Did he hate me? Did he think I had used him from the very beginning? The thought was a physical pain, a constant, dull ache in my chest. I knew from Miller that he, his mother, and Sloan were all being questioned by the FBI as material witnesses. They were not, he assured me, targets of the investigation. But there was nothing from him. Not a single message passed through official channels, not a word, not a sign. Just a profound and terrifying silence. His silence was worse than any accusation. It was a void where our love used to be. I had won the war for my country, for my father's honor, for Sergeant Evans. I had held the line and done my duty. But in the deafening silence from the only man I'd ever truly loved, I had to face the brutal truth. I may have won the war, but I had almost certainly lost the only battle that truly mattered to my heart. Weeks after the arrests, I was called to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee. This was the main event, the public stage. My quiet, safe house existence was over. I was about to step into the brightest, harshest spotlight imaginable. The morning of the hearing, I stood before the mirror in my Army service uniform, the formal Class A uniform often called dress blues. Every brass button was polished, every ribbon perfectly aligned. This uniform was more than just clothing. It was my shield and my standard. As I adjusted my tie, my mind wasn't on the senators or the cameras. It was on a quote from Theodore Roosevelt I had read the night before, from his speech, "The Man in the Arena." It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. Today I was stepping into that arena. The Hart Senate Office Building hearing room was just as cold and imposing as I'd imagined. Marble columns, dark wood paneling, and a high, coffered ceiling that seemed to swallow sound. The air was thick with a tense, expectant silence, punctuated only by the nonstop, blinding flashes of press cameras. As I walked to the witness table, I could feel the weight of a nation's eyes on me. Across the room, Alistair Covington sat with his team of high-priced lawyers. He looked thinner, haggard, the swagger gone. But the venom in his eyes was as potent as ever. He was a snake, coiled and ready to strike one last time. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and swore my oath to tell the truth. The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The questioning from the committee's counsel, representing the government's side, was straightforward. I calmly and factually detailed the timeline of the investigation, the methods of fraud we uncovered, and the direct link between Covington Dynamics' faulty materials and the failure of the equipment in the field. I presented the evidence, piece by piece, building an irrefutable case. It was clean, professional, and devastating. Then, it was their turn. Alistair's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne with a cruel, thin smile and the predatory eyes of a shark, approached the podium. I knew he wouldn't attack the evidence. It was too solid. He was going to attack me. "Captain Haley," he began, his voice oozing a false sincerity, "let's talk about your methods. Is it true that during the entirety of this 7-month investigation, you were engaged in a romantic, intimate relationship with my client's son, Mr. Reese Covington?" The question landed like a grenade in the quiet room. The whispers started immediately. "Objection. the committee counsel said, but the chairman waved him down. She'll answer the question. Yes, that is true, I answered, my voice steady. Thorne smiled. A relationship you failed to disclose for several months, correct? Correct, I said. Then he played his card. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present Exhibit A. He gestured to the large screens on either side of the room. A picture flashed to life. It was a candid photo of Reese and me at the Nationals game, laughing, a shared bag of popcorn between us. Another one appeared, the two of us hiking in Shenandoah, his arm around my shoulder as we looked out at the mountains. Another, us holding hands across the table at the Italian restaurant. They were moments of pure, simple happiness, now twisted into something ugly. You didn't just have a relationship, Captain, Thorne sneered, his voice dripping with accusation. You initiated this relationship. You pursued him, you seduced him, you gained his trust. All for the sole purpose of extracting information and gaining access to his family, isn't that right? You weaponized love, Captain. You turned a young man's affection into a tool for espionage. The room buzzed with chatter. He had painted the picture he wanted. Me as a manipulative, cold-hearted honey trap. A Mata Hari in uniform. He thought he had me cornered, that he had destroyed my credibility. He was wrong. I didn't look at him. I looked directly at the committee chairman, a stern but fair senator from Maine. I let the silence hang for a moment, gathering my strength, not from anger, but from the simple, unshakable truth. Senator, I said, my voice clear and ringing with a conviction that silenced the room. I fell in love with Reese Covington. That is the truth. And on a personal level, it was the greatest mistake of my life. A conflict I will have to live with forever. I paused, letting my admission of vulnerability, of humanity, sink in. But when I was faced with a choice between the heart of one man and my sworn oath to protect the lives of hundreds of thousands of my brothers and sisters in arms, there was no choice at all. Then I turned my head and looked directly at Marcus Thorne. My voice became hard as iron. You call what I did a weapon, sir. I call it my duty. Perhaps that's the difference between your world and mine. It was a direct hit. The air went out of Thorne's attack. He tried to recover, to ask another question, but he had lost control of the narrative. My sincerity, my raw and honest admission of a painful truth, had become my shield. It was more powerful than any lie, any insinuation he could ever invent. The hearing ended shortly after that. As the chairman banged his gavel, a small spontaneous ripple of applause came from the public gallery behind me. I walked out of that hearing room feeling utterly drained, but clean. The fight was over. I had stood in the arena, and I had not been broken. As I stepped into the marbled, echoing hallway, surrounded by my legal team, my eyes scanned the crowd of reporters and staffers. And then I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the hall, leaning against a pillar, away from the chaos. His hair was a mess, and he hadn't shaved in days. He looked exhausted, haunted. But his eyes, those kind, intelligent eyes that had seen me, really seen me, in a crowded diner, were fixed on mine. It was Reese. Reese stood there, leaning against a marble pillar, a solitary island in the chaotic river of reporters and congressional aides flowing through the hallway. The world seemed to fade into a dull roar around us. There was only him. He looked exhausted, his eyes sunken and shadowed with a pain that mirrored my own. My legal team tried to steer me away, but I just shook my head, my eyes locked with his. I walked toward him, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I was finally standing in front of him, the only sound I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Blake, was all he said, his voice raspy, broken. All the strength I had projected in that hearing room, all the icy composure of the soldier, it all dissolved. I was just a woman standing in front of the man whose life I had just detonated. I'm sorry, Reese, I whispered, the words feeling impossibly small. For everything. For the lies. He shook his head slowly, a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. I know, he rasped. I watched the whole thing. I heard what they tried to do to you. And what you said. He took a shaky breath. You were incredible. There was no anger in his voice, no accusation, only a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. Can we? Can we go somewhere? Talk? Somewhere that isn't here. He led me out of the Senate building and a few blocks down the street to the Dubliner, an old, dark Irish pub near Capitol Hill. It was a neutral ground, a place that belonged to neither of our worlds. We found a small, secluded booth in the back, the dark wood and dim lighting offering a fragile sense of privacy. For the first time in months, there were no missions, no pretenses, no hidden recorders. There was only the brutal, painful truth sitting between us on the worn wooden table. He was the first to speak, his voice low. "Why didn't you tell me, Blake, from the beginning?" It was the question I had dreaded, the one I had no good answer for. I looked down at my hands. "Because every single day, you gave me a reason to believe you were nothing like your father," I said, the tears I had held back for so long finally beginning to fall. They tracked silently down my cheeks. "You were kind. You were genuine. You dreamed of art galleries, not hostile takeovers. And I hoped. I stupidly, foolishly hoped that I could have both. That I could do my duty and somehow, miraculously, keep you." I finally looked up at him, my heart aching. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." He didn't recoil. He just listened, his own eyes glistening. He told me about the past few weeks, about the shock, about being interrogated by the FBI for days on end. He told me how, after the initial disbelief, he'd used his access to pull the internal documents himself. He'd stayed up for nights, reading the reports, seeing the doctored test results, facing the undeniable, monstrous truth about the man he called his father. He said he felt betrayed by me, yes, but that feeling was dwarfed by the overwhelming shame he felt for his family's name. We talked for hours, laying the wreckage of our lives out on the table. There was no easy absolution, no magic words to fix what was broken. But there was honesty, a brutal, cleansing honesty. In the days that followed, I began the process of drawing my own lines. My phone rang one afternoon. It was Sloane. Her voice was shaky but strong. "I just wanted to say thank you, Blake," she said. "You did a terrible, necessary thing. You set us free. Both of us." Her words were a small, unexpected comfort in the storm. But other calls came too. A letter arrived from Alistair's attorney. It wasn't an apology. It was an offer. A 7-figure sum of money wired to any account of my choosing. "To compensate for any inconvenience," it read. I tore the letter into tiny pieces, my hands shaking with rage, and threw it in the trash. Genevieve tried to call me twice. I let it go to voicemail. I knew with absolute certainty that to move forward, I had to slam that door shut. The toxic legacy of the Covington family had to stay in the past. The only question was whether Reese would be on my side of that door, or his. A week after the hearing, he came to my apartment. He looked better. He had shaved, and some of the haunted look had left his eyes. He was holding a single sheet of paper. "This is a press release," he said, handing it to me. "It goes out tomorrow morning." I read it. In it, Reese Covington formally announced he was renouncing all claims to the Covington family inheritance. He was resigning from all positions at Covington Dynamics and its subsidiaries. And he was pledging his full, unconditional cooperation with the Department of Justice's ongoing investigation. I looked up from the paper, my heart in my throat. "That legacy, it's not mine," he said, his voice firm with a conviction I'd never heard from him before. "It was built on lies and on the blood of people like Sergeant Evans. I want no part of it." He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine, full of a raw, desperate hope. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were, Blake. I don't know if that's even possible. There's too much damage, too many scars." He took a deep breath. "But I want to try. I want to start over. From here. With the truth. Nothing but the truth." 2 years later. The storm has passed, leaving behind a clear, quiet sky. Alistair Covington is serving a 20-year sentence in a federal prison for fraud and conspiracy against the United States. Covington Dynamics no longer exists as it was. Under the fierce, surprisingly adept leadership of Sloan and a new, federally approved board of directors, the company was restructured, rebranded, and forced into a new era of transparency. The Covington name is no longer a symbol of untouchable power. As for me, I was promoted to major. I now head a new, specialized task force within military intelligence, one created in the wake of the scandal. Our sole purpose is contractor oversight. We ensure that the equipment sent to our troops is exactly what it claims to be. I no longer work in the shadows, hunting for lies. My job now is to bring everything into the light. The work is demanding, but it's honest. And at the end of every day, I know exactly who I am and what I stand for. And Reese and I rebuilt. We rebuilt from the ground up, on a foundation of nothing but brutal, painful truth. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with hard conversations and days when the ghosts of the past felt too close. There were moments of doubt and scars that will never fully fade. But we did it, brick by painful brick. It isn't the easy, blissful love I once dreamed of. It's something far better. It's real. He found his own way to make amends, to redefine his family's legacy. With the personal assets he had left after severing all ties with his father's estate, he started a nonprofit foundation. He called it the Evans Covington Foundation. He named it for Sergeant Evans, the first victim we learned about, and he kept the Covington name not out of pride, but as a constant public reminder of the debt that needed to be repaid. He works tirelessly, not as some detached philanthropist writing checks from a high-rise office, but on the ground. He travels the country, meeting with veterans and their families. He sits in their living rooms, listens to their stories, and helps them navigate the VA system to get the medical care they're entitled to. He hires lawyers to fight for the benefits of soldiers who were harmed by faulty equipment, not just from his father's company, but from any company. He has turned a name that was once a symbol of shame into a beacon of healing and advocacy. He finally found his purpose, not in a corporate boardroom, but in serving the very people his father betrayed. He found his own way to live a life of honor. Today is Memorial Day, the last Monday in May, a day of quiet remembrance. Reese and I drove to Arlington National Cemetery together. I'm in my dress uniform, the familiar weight of it a comfort. He's in a simple dark suit. We don't talk much as we walk through the endless silent rows of white headstones. Each one represents a life, a story, a sacrifice. The sheer scale of it is always humbling, a vast, quiet sea of honor. We stop at the tomb of the unknown soldier, watching the sentinels perform their precise, solemn ritual. The dedication, the unwavering discipline. It's a physical manifestation of the values I hold most dear. We walk on, finding a quiet spot under an old oak tree, its branches offering shade over a section of older graves. We place a single white rose on the headstone of a soldier who died in a war fought long before either of us was born. A simple act of remembrance for someone who has no one left to remember them. Standing there, looking out over the perfectly aligned stones towards the distant, hazy shape of the Lincoln Memorial across the river, a profound sense of peace settles over me. The kind of peace you can only feel after a long, hard war has finally been won. All the battles, the ones in secret, the ones in public, and the ones inside my own heart, they're finally over. Reese turns to me, his eyes holding the shared memory of everything we've been through. The diner, the mountains, the lies, the hearing, the painful rebuilding. It's all there. He reaches out and takes my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. "My father called you trash in a borrowed dress," he says, his voice soft but clear. "He was wrong." He squeezes my hand. "You showed the entire world what real dignity looks like. You didn't just save soldiers' lives, Blake." His eyes hold mine, full of a gratitude that still makes my heart ache. "You saved mine." I squeeze his hand back, a silent acknowledgement of his words, of our journey. I look out at the field of white stones, each one a testament to the fact that dignity isn't about what you wear or the name you carry. It's not about wealth or power or the circles you move in. Real dignity is forged in the choices you make when no one is watching. and it's revealed in the courage you find to stand up for the truth, no matter the cost. Thank you for listening to my story. The battles I fought were public, but I know that so many of you fight your own quiet battles for dignity and honor every single day. You are the man and the woman in the arena. Your courage is what truly matters. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the strength of the human spirit. Until next time, stand tall and hold the line.